The intent of the presentation is to respond to a number of questions that have been raised by the board and the public, to provide greater information, greater clarity, and in some cases provide the board with some alternatives going forward in context of the 218 proposal and related issues. So there have been questions on the level and extent of public participation in this rate increase process. Since September 2017, there's been 18 publicly noticed meetings that have led to where we are today with the proposed rate increase and with the issuance, the recommended issuance of the 218 notice. In addition, a citizens advisory panel was convened to review infrastructure needs and associated revenue opportunities. And of course, those meetings continue. They don't end tonight. We have 2 public workshops that are scheduled, as well as a rate hearing and a number of additional meetings with stakeholder groups going forward. On the watershed, there's been a number of comments, and I think I have not done as good a job as I could explaining the watershed budget and related issues, and we'll try and do it here. I think the roll-up to it, starting maybe backwards, is over the two-year budget. Over that process, the total watershed budget is increased by almost $1.7 million. And as you know, we are allocating $1 million a year additional with the CMF into the watershed. And you can see that the commitment in the budget goes well beyond that. So there's a net very significant increase in the budget. In terms of fire fuel protections and related watershed maintenance activities, year 1, there's just about $1 million increase, an additional smaller increase that reflects cost of living the following year. But collectively, bottom line is a significant increase that continues the last couple years of substantial increases in the watershed budget. This is just a graphical display of the increase in the general 2 big buckets of where the money goes, and you can see the maintenance activities are in kind of fire protection, fuel management are going up significantly in that time frame.
Ben, can I ask you a question before you move from the slide? It looks like the watershed protection piece is taking a little bit of a dip before it goes back up. Can you explain that?
So this is largely attributed to the reduction from 2 deputies to 1.
I see.
In that 1 year. You can see that this the overall programmatic activities do bounce back up and show a net increase over where we are now.
I don't want to interrupt you too much. On heavy equipment, that would include possibly getting some firefighting equipment.
Specifically, can you speak to the equipment that's budgeted? There is a large piece of equipment.
Yes, we're planning on getting another excavator up on the watershed for fuel break maintenance. That's around $250,000. We have our general replacement of some of the Type 6 trucks that have the small water tank and a hose that the Rangers drive on a day-to-day basis.
And I do want to say, generally, we do a tremendous amount of work, of course, in a whole range of areas in terms of wildfire protection activities. We are working to be responsive to the board and the public, and we're pulling those together. We're calling it a wildfire task force that we're convening internally, and we're going to consolidate all of our related activities, bring it to the board, identify gaps in funding needs so there's absolute clarity where we need to fill whether shifting priorities here or moving other elements of the budget to fill those gaps going forward.
Thanks.
Meter size is a basis for the capital maintenance fee. Using meter size to apportion cost is an accepted industry approach and supported by AWWA, which is our national association that sets many standards that most agencies follow and how they run their agency, what equipment they specify, pipe materials and the like, and that is an established documented practice. The meter size represents potential demand on the system distinguished from actual use in a given time by a customer. And the reason that's important in context of infrastructure is the planning for infrastructure, you do look at expected demand on the system over the long term, and meter size does very much inform that. For example, if there were a business that decided they need a 4-inch meter and today they are not using water reflective of that meter size, it's reasonable and appropriate for the agency and our planning efforts to consider that there will be a future use of that meter reflective of the demand. Of course, behind every meter is tremendous amount of infrastructure to support the demand that could be exerted on the system in the future. And our investments are, when we put in a new pipe, we're expecting to get a 100-year life out of it. So we are looking, as we invest in the infrastructure, very futuristic looking based on reasonable expectations of demand. The commercial and institutional private service lines are not included in this fee, and the reason for that is fire lines are essentially never used, fortunately, because they're only in the event of a structure fire for life safety, and those are intermittent in nature and exceedingly infrequent, so they don't play into the long-term demand on a water system. So they are going to be excluded from that, and we feel that's very appropriate. On the related issue of residential meters that are upsized to meet fire sprinkler design, staff is looking into that issue, and we are looking into a similar approach, developing a process to see if we can deal with those, even though they're in the same line, unlike the commercial and institutional fire lines. But if we can deal with those similarly, and we are planning to bring that item back at an upcoming board meeting. There are options for collecting the CMF. As you're well aware, the recommendation is to use the property tax bill to collect this, and some of the reasoning is that a reliable, resilient water system is a long-term benefit to property owners. The investments we make and the value of those, and therefore the cost, would reside with the property owner instead of short-term, at times, renters paying for these very long-term investments in the system. And we did look at numbers, you're probably well aware, but this county does have a fairly high percent of renters here. Alternatively, number 2 up here is a fee could be collected on bi-monthly and have everyone pay who pays the water bill. And another option to address some concerns that have been noted, which I do not believe is accurate, but nonetheless, that it's not transparent to put the fee on the property tax. The district could add a statement on our bi-monthly bill indicating there's a capital maintenance fee collected on the property tax to address that transparency concern. This is to address some comments suggesting that this investment in infrastructure is something new. In the last 10 years, the district's invested over $200 million in the upgrade of a range of infrastructure enhancements noted from the treatment plant, storage tanks, and of course bread and butter pipe replacement of the 900 miles we have. This investment is needed to continue to address the aging of our vast infrastructure, which has a replacement cost of over $2 billion and an average age of 60 years. So you look at that, and $20 million reflects about a 1% investment for a 60-year-old system. It is not excessive, certainly. In concerns that we are not funding the full replacement need of the CIP, no agency can or does address every need in an immediate fashion, rather than doing what staff is recommending and what we've historically done, of taking an adaptive management approach, which is informed by ongoing condition assessment of our infrastructure to continue to maintain the appropriate level of service that the community expects from us.
I have for clarification, Mike. In terms of the storage tanks that have been replaced, what's the nature of the tanks that have been replaced, and what have we replaced them with? Just to some examples.
So we've replaced quite a few redwood tanks. And we replaced those with bolted steel. Yeah. So the nature of the tank primarily is our redwood tanks. Since '92, I think we've replaced about 44 of those.
Any sense on how old some of those tanks were?
They average about 35 years or older, and that's well beyond their useful life. So we have about 6 left that we'll get rid of in the next 10 years.
And then in terms of the deficient pipe, can you give some of the older pipes that have been replaced in the county that are running under some of our streets that have been done in the last 10 years?
Yeah, we've replaced a pipe that's over 100 years old.
And what's the material?
It's typically cast iron, which at one time was the material of choice, and we've discovered that it's not as long-lived as the pipe that we put in now.
Now, what happens to old cast iron pipe once it's been in the ground for an extended period of time?
Well, it typically has a spectacular failure.
Pretty much turns to glass.
Yes.
And
so if you come across a large main break, it's probably cast iron, and we replace it with typically welded steel, which will last at least 100 years, if not longer.
Thanks.
It also kind of gets blockages in it too, doesn't it? Develop some kind of blockage.
Yes, tuberculation. I think Russell calls it. Yeah.
So which increases pump pressure, which
Yes.
increases likelihood of failure. So yeah, that needs to get replaced.
Thanks.
And this is just a graph showing visually the levels of investment in our capital improvement program we've been making over the last 10 years or so. The use of reserves in context of the rate increase, overall the district is not reaching our targeted reserve level. We do have a rate stabilization fund that currently has $9.4 million in it. That is designed generally in the industry for times of drought when you have mandatory reductions which drop your revenue, so you don't find yourself also increasing rates at times you're having mandatory reductions in place. On that, staff recommendation is that we do a separate but detailed review of reserves with the board, looking at reserve policies and associated long-term planning. These issues have come up a bit as part of this process, so we did want to be very clear and transparent that on staffing reduction since 2010. It's been reduced from 266 to 240 full-time positions, and 5 of those have been reduced in the last 2 fiscal years. Our current median salary is a little over $99,000. It supports a very highly skilled professional, technical, and support staff in this organization. And often we do market surveys to ensure that we're in the kind of mid-range of comparable agencies, so we can attract and retain these highly skilled employees. Pensions also, certainly public pensions comes up. Currently today, and the best information we have is from a 2017 report, but we have looked in the past reports and it doesn't go up dramatically year to year. The average annual benefit for a retiree in the district today is $38,000. The FY 2020 projected annual pension cost is 9.23% of our budget, which, as I understand, is on the low end of public agencies. And we do have a table that will get in a bit more detail of our pensions. And of course, the PEPRA, and we do have some more information on that, will be saving us money, delaying eligibility, and reducing benefit amount over time, as is benefiting all public agencies.
So PEPRA, just for the audience, is for new hires, correct?
That's correct. It's new hires since 2013. Thank you.
And Charlie, what percentage of our employees are currently under PEPRA? Oh, you got it up there, sorry.
Yeah, so we have that. So essentially, that is the non-classic. So as in the industry, we call the older system the classic, and the PEPRA the non-classic. And you can see over time, as you would expect, especially kind of with the retirement bubble that we're seeing, that number is continuing to increase and the classic number is continuing to decrease over time. The 20 and 21 obviously are projections, but that's based on looking at different actuarial information. And then you can see the pension costs as total percent of the budget, and that has been going up relatively modestly, but there is an increasing trend on that.
Okay, and could you just explain briefly the PERS discount rate and what the trend is on that?
Do you want to jump in?
Certainly. Yes, back in 2015, the PERS board instituted a ratcheting down of the discount rate, and that's their assumed rate of interest that they'll get from their investments over time. They've also done things like lowered the period from 30 years to 20 years. That has direct effects on how much we pay. So while we have a shrinking workforce, our pension costs do go up, and some of that, as you can see in the PERS discount rate, as that goes down, our pension cost correspondingly has gone up. And that's a simple explanation.
Yeah, okay, thanks a lot.
The board has discussed and staff has brought to the board a Super Saver water program in conjunction with this rate increase. There has been some public comments and some other interest to look at some alternatives. Since this program is a non-rate revenue, it's not linked directly to the 218 notice, and staff is planning at a separate board meeting to bring a review of alternative approaches and associated timing issues to the board.
Can I ask you, Ben, I don't want to interrupt your flow, but just because there have been some comments about how we as a district are going to deal with people who are on fixed incomes or otherwise part of vulnerable communities, you know, can you speak to that? It seems to me that this is the point in your presentation where that's most relevant.
The district has currently a low-income program to help the current demarcation. I don't know if Charlie, if you can help me, it addresses at what income level or percent of low income in the county?
It was raised by the board 2 years ago from 50% to 60% of the low income designation by the federal government. That currently is $117,000 for a family of four. I think it's
In this county,
$80,000 in this county, county specific, $80,000 for an individual. And so if you make up to 60% of that, you would qualify for a waiver of the fixed fees of the meter service charge and the watershed maintenance fee that is on the bi-monthly bill.
And there's also a medical discount too, isn't there?
Yes, if you can be certified by a physician to have a condition that requires additional use of water, you are similarly waived the fixed fees, but also given an additional amount of tier 1 rate, and so you're charged at a lower rate for that additional water.
And we have given direction to staff to look into raising the eligibility for low income discount. So just for your information.
Can I ask a question?
Not right now.
Okay.
The capital maintenance fee, the current proposal is establishing the fee in conjunction with and supporting the next 10 years of the capital improvement program, including 5 years of indexing to the engineering news record, which is a construction-related index, and capped at no more than 4% per year. There's, for board consideration, a possible approach or enhancement to that would be to establish an explicit public check-in at year 4 in conjunction with the 4-year rate review process we'll be doing with the operating budget, which would provide a review of the amount and the mechanism of collecting the CMF. It would be informed by over 3 years of experience and continued refinement of the district's asset management activities, as well as our ongoing efforts to address fire risks in the watershed and understand if additional revenue would support those activities. There was a, well, just jump into it, the impact of delaying the 218 notice. Currently, the schedule, assuming staff has receives authorization tonight to proceed with the 218, that allows us to hold the public hearing May 28th. If that date, May 28th, slips, we do start getting very compressed in terms of our ability to generate what we need to generate with the information that would be concluded at the public hearing, the file essentially that's provided to the county for the new capital maintenance fee. In order to deliver this to the county in time, when we look at the time it's going to take to prepare, finalize the 218 notice based on board direction, print it, mail it out, and have 45 days from the last mailing to the public hearing. Any slippage from tonight would impact the May 28th date and then cause the problems I noted in terms of being able to, with confidence, meet the timing associated with the county for adding this to the property tax bills. Of course, the operating budget delays are fairly linear in terms of the loss of the 4% additional revenue every month would be approximately $325,000. That depends based on water usage, so it's an average. The capital maintenance fee impact on schools has come up. There has been some misunderstanding or misinformation that's been out in the community on this. This is the accurate information based on meters and of course excluding the fire flow lines from the schools. The average per school in the bottom is about $4,500, and you can see how it impacts the various districts in the table. To reduce the year-to-year impact of the capital maintenance fee that of course is designed to move to pay-as-you-go approach and reserve debt capacity for emergencies, and ultimately very materially save our ratepayers money from the transactions of bonds and the interests. But it does have a year-to-year impact for the board to consider. There is alternatives. One would be a 2-year phase-in, and this is assuming, were you to consider a 2-year phase-in, 50% year 1 and 50% of the CMF year 2, there would be a loss in revenue coming into the capital program that would impact the long-term investment, of course, in the infrastructure. And likewise, a 3-year phase-in would have a greater impact, but that's also for the board to consider as a way of lessening the year-to-year, 2-year impact of the capital maintenance fee. So that concludes the issues. This is just moving to some slides to remind you and the public, if we look at the history of rate increases here, the green bars reflect the many years where the board has kept no rate increases, sensitive to the interests of the community and tightening our belt internally. This gray line indicates if since 1990 the board had increased rates strictly limited to inflation, would be slightly higher than what's being proposed now. And the higher line shows an average nationally of over 200 agencies, the rate increases they've made and where we would be if we kept in line or similar with them. And I think what that tells us is all water agencies, like all stewards of public infrastructure, are struggling with the aging of infrastructure and the need to ask ratepayers and the public to pay for more as the infrastructure is aging. This is kind of a classic rate comparison that the district typically does, and the blue bars reflect the district where we are currently and with the proposed increase before you. You can see we're very much on the low end of a pretty broad range of comparable agencies, and even with this proposed increase, we're still, somewhere in the middle, and I would expect us to quickly slide back because this rate increase, this difference is really reflecting this one-time shift to this rate-funded capital program, and the subsequent 4% rate increases in the next 3 years are lower generally than we understand the other agencies will be moving forward with. The impact to the average customer, and we do define that by a 5/8 meter and water usage. This is how we've always looked at our average customer here in the organization. The 4% rate increase reflects, from a dollar standpoint, $2.71 increase monthly, and the capital maintenance fee Again, this is for the 5/8 inch meter on a monthly basis, even though on the property tax, it's, you generally pay twice. You can split up the amount, but looking at it monthly for apples to apples in conjunction with the monthly rate increase, it would be $13.63, collectively about $16 or so. This is a table you've seen before in terms of the charge of the capital maintenance fee based on meter size and percents of customers and where they fall in the number of meters we have out there. So this moves us to the Prop 218 notice. If the board would like to entertain discussions, this could be a good time in terms of the considerations that you have in terms of the 4-year public check-in process. If the board would like to proceed with that, we could codify that in the 218 notice to make that clear. And of course, now or prior to or not at all, you could consider the phasing of the CMF.
And can I go with a more prosaic, very tiny issue? One thing I noticed in the draft that you've provided is that in a previous version, I guess it's just a design thing, we had indicated what percent of the district's meters these different meter sizes were. I thought that was helpful, so I'm sorry that got taken out. Because right now you go from 5/8 to 10, and there's no way to know. I mean, we say on the other page that 5/8 is the average, but there's really no way to know that really there's virtually no, unless I'm missing it.
Oh, it's still included in the CMF.
Oh, is it on the other page? I was looking at the back page. Did I miss it? Where's the percentages?
That's included in the CMF table. It's a few pages back before the, yeah.
Oh,
Okay. And then we carried that same color shading over to the other table. So hopefully, as folks are reading it through in order, they'll follow that through.
I think you had it on the other table before, so I was expecting it there, and maybe it just didn't print the color shading. Okay, no problem, thank you.
I think that the public would like to get comments, but I think before then, if there's any other questions from the board to staff.
Well, I guess this is a question and a comment. I think the phasing concept is interesting. My understanding is that, and Ben, I think you covered this, but just to be very clear, this is the notice that really will define the ceiling of what we do. Yeah. So from now in the next assuming this is approved tonight, for the next 60 days, we'll have opportunity to work in that phasing concept, because I'm concerned about trying to do that now. I think it's complicated, and I think it's part of what we want to be talking to the public about in the workshops that were mentioned, as well as I think there's some other meetings planned. So I think it would be at least my sense that we probably don't want to get that, not that we don't want to, but that there may not be a benefit into trying to revise this notice to address that issue, because I don't think we've had a chance to really think about as a board how that would work. But as long as we know, we're clear that we have the opportunity to do that within this process, I think I just want to make sure that we have that opportunity.
Yes, the board, with the issuance of the 218, has full latitude to make any decision in terms of the operating rate, the CMF fee, so long as it is below the impact, the financial impact to the ratepayers indicated in the 218 notice. So whether it's the 4% increases, the amount of the CMF, the phasing of the CMF, all of those are completely within the board discretion up until at certainly the public hearing.
So our future workshops and public hearings coming up will be designed to get, not for us to be necessarily talking to the public, but rather them talking to us, so that we'll receive input to make these kinds of decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. The workshops are designed both for the public to have an opportunity to better understand some of the activities of the district that aren't always front and center, that go into providing reliable, safe drinking water day in, day out, 24/7, but certainly there'll be adequate time to receive comments from the public on this proposal.
Right, and so to cut through that to a certain extent, the decision we're being asked to make tonight is an initial decision. It's step one, and the process will not be finalized for another 2 months or so while we go through that.
That's correct.
I have a question. Just, I like the idea of the 4-year check-in. And, that seems like something we could put in the notice just without sort of going into the weeds on rate setting, which is what we're gonna be doing for the next 2 months. So I would like to see us add that to the notice. It sounds like that's a pretty easy thing to add.
If the board, as a body would like to see that, staff did craft up language of what that would look like in the notice, and we do have copies for the public as well, with the goal of having clarity, the board having clarity what that language would look like, so we wouldn't have to hold this over to another board meeting. So we could review that now or after public comments if the board would like to see it.
But it's also something that could be made anywhere along the line after we've heard from people. And,
Absolutely.
It may take a different, possibly even better shape when we
Yes.
have more information.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's see how it goes.
Okay.
Did you want to go further with your presentation, or do you want to open up public comment?
And there's only, well, I think public comment works well right now. There was just one more slide I didn't get to, which is next steps. I do think the public would benefit from seeing the next steps. I could just speak to them. We don't have to.
Don't rush. I mean, if you have another slide, let's.
Well, it's just one more slide, but we did want to share that currently the 2 workshops are scheduled. The first for April 25th, and that will be in Mill Valley, and May 15th, which will be in San Rafael, and the current public hearing is scheduled for May 28th.
So are those the current dates if we approve this tonight, or did those dates shift?
Those are the current dates, assuming we move forward tonight.
Be sure you publicize that to the public.
Absolutely. We'll be extensively publicizing this. There's a number of public information activities that will be triggered, assuming we proceed with the 218 tonight, including a whole portion of our website and an assorted number of activities that will be very clear on time and locations, and we'll use social media and every tool available to get this information out.
And to the gentleman's comment, this information is in the 218 notice, just so that it'll be in there. Thanks for raising
You
that.
know how people read that, right?
We're also going to have a page on the website
Thank you.
that you can go right at the home page and zero in on all the 218.
I would say, Larry, you might want to consider some additional publicity, like an article in the IJ, something.
I have a feeling there will be many, many, many articles in the IJ.
Okay.
John,
We excel at selling the IJ paper, and we're delighted to have the reporter here with us tonight.
John, there's going to be a number of less formal public outreach meetings, including one tomorrow and throughout this 60-day, 45-day window. So there will be many opportunities.
Thank you.
Hold on a second, please. Okay, now, are you done with your presentation? Okay. Okay. So, any other questions, comments? Mr. Russell? Okay, so let's open it up.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. Let's open it up for public comment. And if you have a card, if you could give it to our secretary.
Just walk in front of everybody right there, sir.
No, I had a card.
Okay.
Good evening, supervisors. My name is John Hanley. I want to first address, I don't know who you are, Mary Casey, but my mother is a Mary Casey, and you seem like a wonderful person. I disagree with what the other gentleman had to say. I am here to urge that we get a rate increase immediately. It was very well explained tonight. We have aging infrastructure as well as a tinderbox called Mount Tamalpais. Some of us are homeowners, and some of us have also now received letters that they will not be insured due to the problems up north as well as down south. So as a homeowner and a longtime resident of Marin, I urge you to get the rate increase done, get the pipes, and I will also admire the fine employees that you have here in the Water District. They're very conscientious people. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Come on forward.
Good evening. My name is Richard Harris. I live in Strawberry. President, members of the board. Let me give some background before I offer comments. In the last 10 years, the population of Marin County has grown at a 4% rate. Water demand, on the other hand, has been absolutely flat over that 10-year period. Operating revenues have increased at a 4.2% rate. Operating expenses have only gone up 3.25%. So financially, you would think that you were doing well. The proposed rate increase, I think, is not well explained. Rate increase in year one for 5/8 inch meter is actually 28.2% with the capital charge. Each year thereafter, it's around 4%. So over that four-year period, it's an increase of 9.64% in rates. Ought to be more than enough to cover anything that you're contemplating. What are the stated reasons for the rate increase? Replacing aging infrastructure. Scheduled infrastructure should be funded out of annual depreciation. That's the whole concept behind depreciation. Subsidizing monthly bills. You've got $9.4 million in your reserves, as I guess Bennett said earlier, which is 2 times the largest withdrawal that you've had to make over the last 10 years. Adding to that is, to me, does not make good financial sense. Better management of long-term debt. This is one of my pet peeves. Pay-as-you-go violates the matching principle, the intergovernmental equity principle, and is contrary to the guidance of the CFA Institute. The concept is that long-lived assets should be financed, should be capitalized so that you match the life of the long-lived asset with the user. Yeah. Pay-as-you-go unnecessarily penalizes current users and actually has a negative impact on your financial statements relative to pay-as-you-go. I can talk more about that later on. Better manage the watershed. Your watershed expenditures ought to be covered out of your normal operating budgets. Your FTEs, your watershed employees have gone down 25%. There's no question that the expenses continue to grow at about a 7% rate, which is the highest rate of growth of any of your operating expenses. There's absolutely no explanation in the CAFR or anywhere else for why that's the case. The other 2 big expenditures are general administrative expenses, depreciation, and amortization. Last reason that you give is keeping up with inflation. CPI has compounded at 1.76% over the last decade. Total operating expenses, as I mentioned, have gone up 3.25%. That's something that we ought to be looking at, why it's twice the rate of inflation. But as I said, your total operating revenues have increased 4.2%. So it's a little bit less of a concern. What are the real reasons for the increase? I would argue recognition of pension and post-retirement health care benefits is a problem that every public agency in the United States faces today. Massive. Pay-as-you-go versus debt financing. You have an opportunity to borrow money today at generational low rates. Why wouldn't you finance something today with debt? Pay today's prices for it, like the generator, rather than waiting 4 years or 5 years or 8 years to pay for it out of cash flow. It makes absolutely no sense. Watershed maintenance, I touched on that. I don't understand what's going on there. G&A and depreciation and amortization, I also am not exactly sure what's going on. There's not a lot of detail.
Can you kind of wrap it up, please? Your 3 minutes are up, sorry.
Oh, that's all I got? I thought you got 5. Okay. No, I would just say that I think this is a wonderful organization, wonderful people, you do a great job. I don't understand spending a lot of time on the financial statements, where this money is going. You know, if you had a massive expenditure that had to be financed, I'd understand that. But you're basically spending more money. It would appear that you're spending more money than you're taking in. That's why you have to raise rates, right? But the reality is you're taking in more money than you're spending. Your operating revenues are greater than your operating expenses.
We also have what's called debt coverage. So
Right.
not all our expenses are operational.
Right.
Okay? And we can talk about it further, maybe offline. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, so just so that, because sometimes there's confusion, we don't engage with the public during open comment because those items are not agendized. This item is
That's fine.
agendized. No, I'm just asking you, even though your time is up to talk, I'd just like you to remain for a minute because I think you've raised, first of all, I want to thank you for your comments. They were very thoughtful. And I want to ask the indulgence. I think there are a few questions. We can't answer all of them, but I think there's a couple big ones that you raised that I'd like to be sure that we touch on. And the first is the question of depreciation. Can you guys explain, respond? I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Richard Harris.
Mr. Harris's comment on, why we're not covering more of our capital out of depreciation.
Governmental accounting handles depreciation different than private sector accounting. Governmental accounting really just shows up in our annual audit, our CAFR, our comprehensive annual financial report, where we do take a charge there, but it's a non-cash charge. If you were to look at our replacement costs of roughly $2 billion plus, you would see that our depreciation would be much higher than what we actually book because we're booking at historical cost, not replacement cost. That's all to say that if we followed what you were saying about depreciation, we would be raising rates actually higher.
You have a 5-year capital budget. You want to be able to project out 5 years what your capital expenditures are going to be. You want to be able to budget for those capital expenditures. They're in the budget now.
Which we do.
Yeah, we actually have a 10-year plan.
Okay.
Yes.
The other quick point, and I know we can't get to all of them, but the point that you raised about money being cheap right now. We know we've done a lot of bonding, but I think I don't know if Charlie, if this is you or if this is Ben, but part of the reason that we are moving in this direction is because we have issued a great deal of debt. So do you want to speak to that?
Yes, currently we have 3 major outstanding bond issues going back to 2012, 2016, 2017. 2012 was a major refinancing of existing debt, taking advantage of the low interest rates that were existing at the time. 2016 and 2017 were used to fund our capital program. We've projected that if we continue to borrow at that rate every 2 years to fund our capital program, we would add an extra $160 million in our principal. Add to that interest costs, issuance costs, possibly refinancing costs, as debt seldom is paid off in one chunk, and you could add upwards to $170 million in addition to that. Currently, we have about $280 million in principal and interest scheduled to be paid between now and 2052. We have managed our debt, I think, appropriately. However, if we continue to add at the rate we had been adding, that would create a bind. In fact, just to reach the debt coverage, of paying our debt and also the bond covenants, we would have to have a substantial rate increase anyway just to meet that for a 2-year borrowing from this point forward. So while debt is an excellent tool, we've used it about as much as we can right now. And one last item I would add to it is another emergency funding area for us. So if we had a significant event where we had to come up, we have 90-something pump stations. If we had half of them disabled for some reason, we would be tapping whatever debt capacity we have left to be able to come up with funds on for something like that.
And
All right,
just briefly, just to add to that comment, the level of investment in the nature of our capital work going forward in the 10-year plan is kind of bread and butter capital investments that are going to go on well beyond this 10 years. So to continue to debt fund those ongoing capital investments, probably not the best analogy, but it gets into buying routine items on a credit card versus what Charlie was saying, reserve the debt capacity for unexpected big issues. Could be natural disasters, could be dam issues that we have in the watershed that are one-time intermittent expenditures that would very much make sense to spread over generational that debt provides.
And let me just offer 3 comments. One, the routine capital expenditures that you're talking about would ordinarily be funded out of cash flow. Every agency in the United States does that.
That's what we're.
Number 2, you have a AA+ rating. That is a luxury. You don't need a AA+ rating. You have a 152 debt service coverage. You have a debt to equity ratio of 3.74. You are flush. You could do a lot of buying. You have 175 million of bonds outstanding. Your indentures allow you to issue another 175 million. I'm not suggesting that you do that. You do have to reserve some for emergencies. But to switch all of a sudden from debt financing to 100% pay as you go, to me makes no sense.
Could I just?
And I spent my entire career in this business.
Could I just say one thing? The 3.75 for debt coverage ratio is if this is approved. Our current debt coverage ratio is much closer.
No, it's 152 last year.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's not prospective, it's historical.
152, correct. And we're also using the rate stabilization fund to augment that.
Absolutely, okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a number of other folks.
I'll be brief. I just have a question. If you implement a property tax, is that ever gonna go away? Or is that just gonna, like all of our taxes, continue to go up?
I don't think it can go up.
No, there is there is the ceiling on the first 4 years, but what happens after that? You're gonna come to us again, like all government agencies do. I just really object to being taxed this way. I wanna see it on my bill. You know, I understand, I'm an engineer, I understand infrastructure renewal, I understand all of that, and the need for it and the need to fund that. But I do not wanna be taxed on that infrastructure, because I also know the experience of taxes, and when in our life have taxes ever gone away, been eliminated, even with those time periods like the recent transportation tax, what happened when that was gonna run out? It came on the ballot again. And this is what's gonna happen if you start taxing our property value. I also object to the idea that renters somehow, that properties that have renters should not be included in this tax, because what happens is people become more callous about their use of water. As I mentioned earlier, I see people putting in lawns, spraying the water, washing their cars. This is going on in Marin. And you as an agency, what are you doing about it? I mean, who do we call? The police? You know, how does this get reported? There's no incentive for people to conserve water. It's just really, and then the last thing I'd like to note is comparing us to anybody in Silicon Valley is really unfair with all of those young techie millionaires. I mean, honestly, they have money to burn, they're buying their houses cash. That's not reasonable.
Could I just respond briefly?
Yes.
You know, we do have tiered rates that
Yes.
do kick in if people use over 21 CCFs, I think, during summer. So there are tiered rates, there are incentives, there are programs. We have a robust conservation program. And I would just say, I don't want to be, argumentative, but the proof's in the pudding. And our actual volume of water sales has decreased by 1/3 in the last 15 years in spite of population growth of about 2 to 4%. I'm not sure what Mr. Harris
I
quoted.
think he's right, it is about
So,
3-4%.
But it
It
doesn't
actually-
mean we can't do more.
No, that's true. That is very
I
true.
understand what you're saying. I've been told here by your agency that I have very low water use. I took out my lot. I've done everything,
Oh, and-
you know? But, so I understand all of that, but it doesn't mean that you stop there.
We are not going to stop there. As a matter of
We
fact,
can do
one
more.
of our more contentious discussions was about our conservation budget, and it's, and keeping it robust. So, our eye remains on that goal.
I'll just say one last thing. I agree with Larry's comments, and I appreciate yours, and especially given your experience. I would say that one, we haven't fixed our capital budget. I mean, there's any number of things that we can do. One of the things that I think a lot of us want to do is see some of that capital spent on conservation initiatives, specifically distributed infrastructure, like lawn changeouts, gray water systems. We're now in a position where those kinds of rebates can be capitalized in the same way as built infrastructure. So that is an option for us. Going forward, and I think that's the kind of thing. So I guess what I'm saying is we hear you, but don't think that we are only spending money in one way. One thing we can use these funds for is to do exactly the kind of programs to incentivize further levels of becoming resilient by getting our consumers to partner with us in implementing those systems.
Okay, thank you very much. Doug?
Thanks very much, Director Bregman. Doug Kelly, Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers. A couple of things. First off, I want to agree with the gentleman before me who talked about PAYGO. PAYGO is really a great idea when it's appropriate. No one but the then members of the Marin Municipal Water District Board of Directors is responsible for the fact that from 1994 to 03, there were no rate increases. That is reckless. It is reckless. It ruins your credit rating. It's inappropriate. It's a cheap way to get reelected. It's just a bad idea all around. And because of that failure to be responsible from 1994 to 03, now we have these huge rate increases. I've seen that on my board. As you know, I serve on cost, but I also serve on Ross Valley, and we saw times when there were no rate increases, and there are these big jumps. It's just wrong. But then to have the current ratepayers pay for capital improvements when you kind of gave a pass to people in the past, and you're not asking people 20 years from now, the new residents of this district who will be living here in 20 years and 30 years will be benefiting from the upgrades that you're doing. I want to be clear about a couple of things. The Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers has never been against tax. We try and make fair taxes. We try and work with organizations to ensure that the tax that they need to collect is done in the best manner. That's what we do. I would say one of the things that we're also concerned with is transparency. As you know, there was a presentation of the San Anselmo Town Council. Not one of the 5 members felt you were transparent. They were stunned that to this day you don't film your meetings. This is just unbelievable. I mean, it's not 1947 anymore. Come on now. I'm happy to see that the staff has got this projection going into the next room, and Cost has got a iPad or iPhone. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. It's got to end, this lack of transparency. With due respect to your new general manager, who I welcome here, he said there were 18 public meetings. As you know, at the last board meeting, the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers, me specifically, issued a cease and desist order for your lack of following the Brown Act. If you have a standing subcommittee meeting noticed, that's a standing subcommittee meeting. It's not something that the public is expected to be a full board meeting. You continue to do that. I'm just asking you, when you're in a hole, stop digging. That's just my feeling. The other thing is, the new general manager gave a great presentation tonight. Why that wasn't in the packet 72 hours before this meeting is something I just can't comprehend. This is just not the way public agencies work. You know, guys are living in a bubble. And then the last thing is, we were talking about pension costs, and we all face pension costs. Let's be honest about it. 7.0% to 10.4% in 4 years is not modest. It's what's happening to us all. We see it. Let's just be honest with each other. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Diane Newhouse, I live in San Rafael. I'm not a financial whiz, I'm just a retired senior that's having to deal with all these increases now in our old age. And even though the water district's great, and I don't have any problem with the service and the great water we have, but this is beyond inflation, this increase. And there might be another way to approach it, maybe a short-term assessment, but I agree with that lady that when you put a tax on, they rarely ever come off. So maybe there's another way to look at it from the approach. Also, we're on a water pump, so without electricity, we don't have water, so it's an issue of where we are. And I didn't check out our meter, but it's probably the 5/8 residential where we are. But that could be an issue. The other thing is, you know, because of these kind of huge rate increases, and particularly at an older age when they hit you so hard, and most of you aren't there yet, but maybe it's time for the grand jury to come in and to just take a whole look at the way everything is run, because maybe there's some other viewpoints that need to be made. But from my perspective, it's just that it's way over inflation, and it's really going to hit some of us very hard that are not only on fixed incomes, but sometimes diminishing incomes. So that's
Thank you very much.
If you could leave your comment cards with the board secretary, we can record it in the minutes.
Hello, my name is Paul Clark. I live 41 Inverness Drive in the Loch Lomond neighborhood of San Rafael with my wife and 16-year-old son. We're in our 60s. Because I'm not your average customer, I'm part of, I guess, your 3.76%. I have a 1.5-inch water meter. And that's because we live at the top of a steep 3-house driveway. And that 1.5-inch water meter is required simply to get water to our single-family residence. We still need a boost to the water pressure with a pump and a bladder system. Most of our neighbors live in similar or larger homes closer to or downhill from the main, and they have 5/8-inch meters. In 2016, I expressed my concern to MMWD when they decided to dramatically increase fixed service charges and watershed management fees on larger meters. They explained to me that the differential was justified because the district had embarked on a 10-year meter replacement program, and that my meter was much more expensive than the 5/8-inch meter. They said my meter was $799 to $1,168 to replace versus $6,270 for a 5/8-inch meter. I pointed out at the time that I was being penalized because my home happens to be uphill of the main, and the service charge and happened to be uphill of the main, and that over 10 years the increase in the service fee would pay for the new water meter many times over. I currently pay $115.43 service charge and $25.02 watershed fee for a total of $140.45. Now that's $842.70 in charges and fees, even if I don't use 1 ounce of water. By comparison, 5/8 inch meter total is $279.42 per year. The district's proposal will require me to pay the in 2019, $128.27 service charge, $26.31 watershed fee, or a total of $154.48, or $927.48 per year in fees charges. Add to this the proposed $817 capital maintenance fee. I would be paying a total of $1,044.95 per year in charges and fees, even if I don't use 1 ounce of water. The proposal we require for 5/8 inch meter annualizes to $299.70 in charges, plus $163 in capital management for $463.20, which is 26.5% of the $1,744.95 I would be paying for similar service. I urge you to reconsider the concept of applying the meter size charge, at least to residential situations, because there is no way this is equitable. There's no way I can use more water than I already use. I have to have a bladder and a pump simply to get the water pressure that I need. And I tried to address this 3 years ago with the district, and now this is more than adding insult to injury. It's my wife's comment to me when she heard this, I guess we better move. And you're not looking at all the situations, you're not looking closely. I'm not the average ratepayer, and there aren't any average ratepayers. Each situation is different, and to apply a one-size-fits-all meter charge is inequitable.
Thank you very much. We are, as Ben mentioned in his report, we are looking into some exceptions. I'm not sure what the parameters we have under 218 are to meet, the exceptional circumstances that you're in, but I'm sure we can look into it and at least see.
My question, do you think it's equitable for me for the same service to pay $1,744 a year before I get any water?
I think it's a pretty difficult situation that you're facing. I do agree with that.
So how do I follow up on that?
You should give your card to Stephanie.
I gave it to her, and 3 years ago I just got an argument from an engineer using totally different justifications than what you're using now.
Well, we're going to be meeting for the next 45 days at least, and you can contact any of us through the website, email us, and we can continue the conversation.
I would ask perhaps that, since you seem to think this is an exceptional situation, that perhaps you could follow up with me since you got my details.
Okay.
Rather than me having to do the daisy chain around the district.
Well, and it does make more sense for you to probably talk with staff. I mean, this is a fairly technical.
Well, maybe somebody at staff could talk to me, but I talked to staff 3 years ago about this,
I'm
and
sorry.
there was no sympathy.
I'm sorry. I meant, you have a bunch of managers sitting around the table, and I think we're all hearing your situation.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Good evening, Paul Primo, Mill Valley. I'm here for cost. I mentioned at one of your earlier meetings a very common sense approach that you should be taking rather than what you're proposing. And the math is simple. You're looking for $16.5 million in a year. You have 10 million CCF per year. That's $1.65 per CCF. Based on the customer's usage. Has nothing to do with it solves all the problems that a lot of people are raising here about being charged for very little usage of water or for not even using water, but still getting this charge the way you're structuring it. And I don't know why you haven't considered that. It should have been one of your first alternatives, and you should have used it. I'm dismayed tonight, again, by a very nice presentation that we should be commenting on, but we don't see it until tonight. Again, the process that you're following is flawed. by not letting the public see some of the things that are so vital. And you're gonna vote on it tonight, and it's gonna go. You're talking about exemptions. We haven't heard anything until tonight about possible exemptions for homes that may have sprinkler systems. You've also mentioned, and I question it, that the private service lines do not impose any capacity requirements on your infrastructure. And so therefore you conclude that they're exempt. That is the issue that came in last meeting, 2 weeks ago, at the last minute, and was why I commend President Bregman for saying, let's have a timeout and let's come back and focus tonight. Well, it's still there. And I don't see the justice for that. It's inappropriate. Okay, now, four-year phase-in. We've never heard that before. It might be a good idea. We heard what it's gonna cost in deferred money that you're gonna receive. Another thing that process-wise has been pulled out of the hat, another rabbit that we don't see until tonight. And so how can we comment on it, other than to say, it's new, it's not ready for this to go forward the way that you're planning to do it. Ben presented a slide about your salaries. It showed the median of 99,000. A median is halfway up the ladder. You all know that. The average is all of the people on the ladder salaries divided by the number of people. The average salary is much higher than your 99,000. I don't have the number in front of me, but I would wager it's in the 150,000 on average. No? Do you know what it is?
I don't know, it's much lower than this.
It's much higher than 99.
Does
Okay,
staff have
I
a
just
number?
leave you with that. These are some of the things that we don't see until tonight. So how can we comment intelligently in the 3 minutes you give us? So this isn't ready to go. It's unfair to people who've conserved water. And the $1.65 per CCF is way below what the cost would be putting, for example, for me, we use 5 CCF in our monthly bill. The $163, I'm gonna do this in my head, in 1/6 of the year is about $28, okay? $28 is what you're gonna impose on me on my monthly bill. But if you did $1.65, it would be $8. You're giving me a 45% increase in my bill on my 5/8 meter for the consumption that I impose. And you talk about averages being what, 23%? And you haven't even looked at how much the 1-inch meter, 20% of your customers are gonna be paying for their $409 per year. So I guess in summary, it still is a lousy, poorly thought out proposal. And you should be doing it on a usage basis, not as you're proposing. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Do you have the salary number?
It's 105,000 and a little bit. So it's
Can you
less
say
than-
that louder?
It's $105,000 is the average salary. The median is 99.
Well, then use the average.
And Charlie, we talked about this earlier, and we should get this out. I would like to get that list of the qualifications and certifications of staff, because they're highly qualified and highly competent staff. So it's something else that all of us need to appreciate.
Yeah, I do believe that we have over 70% of staff are degreed and certified in one way or another.
Yeah, and we'll get that information out. Hi. Moving forward.
My name is Basha Crane. I live in Kentfield. Good evening. Regardless of your infrastructure investments or inflation, this board was elected to give us potable water at a reasonable cost. and that's the goal of this water district. Potable water at a reasonable cost. Now, the water rates have never been reasonable, but this increase is horrendous. Now, if you consider that between 2010 and 2018, inflation rose 14%, and the water rates rose 3 times that amount. So, when you send out your notification notices, I hope that customers send back all those letters with protests like they did in 2017 when you were forced to scale back your plan. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Just for clarification, the 218 notice gives us the parameters within which we work. So just.
Oh, I did have a question, may I? What percent of your budget, proposed budget for this year, goes for fluoridation? I've often wondered that.
I don't know if anybody has the number, but I can get that to you.
Thank you.
Aye.
Hello, my name is David Houston from San Anselmo. I'm just going to speak to the idea that I understand that the goal of the water board is to generate a certain amount of money per year for capital improvement. We need $20 million. If we put the burden on water usage, we're going to all conserve more and you're not going to hit your $20 million target. I think that's pretty obvious. So, the second issue has to do with that water meter size. I live on a 5,000 square foot lot. I've got a 1,600 square foot house that's 100 years old. We use very little water. There's nothing left to water. There are houses certainly probably in a Butterfield that are half-acre lots, 1-acre lots, that probably also have a 5/8 inch meter. The idea of progressive taxation is being abandoned by this county through parcel taxes, that we are making a one-size-fits-all. And frankly, this water meter size is a parcel tax, a one-size-fits-all. A small house, a small water consumption, a bigger house, a bigger lot, a more valuable property with a 5/8 inch meter. It's not a progressive fee. And I would ask you to revisit that. The idea of water usage, $16 million, $1.63 cubic foot. I'm looking at my bill because I brought it. Yeah, it actually works out that my bill would probably be about $163 a year. But again, it's not a progressive formula, and I think it needs to be revisited so that this kind of fee is more in keeping with the spirit of Marin, and frankly with a democratic spirit of progressive taxation. Because at the end of the day, many of us look at this as a tax, not a service fee. Thank you.
Can I just, sir, I just want to thank you for your comments, but just one quick thing, just so that on that issue, this came up earlier, but I want to just make sure it's clear. We do have tiered rates. So that is part of the progressive
But I'm
piece.
talking about the idea of this service fee.
Yes.
You're doing a one-size-fits-all on the service fee.
And you're
regardless of usage, regardless of house size, regardless of value.
You are right about that. I was simply making the point that it's only a part, a relatively small part. Where Marin is very similar to virtually every other water district in California nationwide is that 80%, is it 80%? It might be even more, of our costs are fixed. So our costs, everybody in the town, in the county could decide not to use any water, and our costs are largely, so that's part of what we're trying to address. We're not trying to address all of it that way, but we still don't have much parity between our fixed costs and the way that we bring in revenue to address those costs. So I'm simply explaining that I think I speak for all of us when I say we agree with you in your principles about progressivism. It's just we can't do 100% based on use, because variable use is only a small part of our costs. I'm sorry?
We'll all stop using. No, but again, from an idea of progressivism,
right.
The gentleman with the 1-inch meters that can get a bladdered water service to the top of his hill
Yeah.
This doesn't make sense.
1.5-inch meter.
Thank you for the comment, good observation. Hi, Alex.
Alexander Vinnick for Deep Topics Institute in Fairfax. And hearing the presentation that Mr. Hornstein gave, leaving a couple things out of my comments. But I agree with what people have said. As of this afternoon, I was looking at the staff reports, and basically none of this was in there. So having to show up tonight, and fortunately hearing it now, but we don't have a chance to think about it and use that information in our preparation. There's something wrong with that. MMWD has not honestly and transparently answered some fundamental questions regarding the size and structure of its current rate hike plan. First, in recent years, MMWD has already increased residential customer rates and fees substantially. Now it intends to impose yet another significant rate increase with a built-in annual escalator beyond the rate of inflation, plus an additional cash basis capital management fee also continually increasing each year. And by the way, I heard the discussion about debt service versus and so on, but I still think that these comments are relevant. By choosing a cash basis fee supposedly to save interest costs, the district is proving how clueless it is regarding the real suffering all these additional charges will cause many of its residential customers. I've been an MMWD customer since 1989. During that time, whenever funds were needed for infrastructure repair and improvement, they were always raised by bond issues, even during periods when interest rates were much higher. And the payments due on those bonds were factored into the water rates that appeared on our bi-monthly water bills. Since the members of the current board, except for Director Bragman, have served continuously for the past 10 to 25 years, why have they suddenly decided we now need to pay entirely for all this infrastructure improvement on a pay-as-you-go cash basis, even though interest rates continue to be relatively low, presenting an opportunity for another bond issue at favorable rates? And even though adding the cash basis fee structure piles on the ratepayer costs unnecessarily and mercilessly. Please scrap this fee and instead prepare a bond issue to raise the necessary funds, or at least provide a combination of the two approaches. By the way, if it was a bond issue, then we wouldn't have all these issues about customers with the size of the meter and sprinklers and all this stuff, paying a lot more money in a fee, so on. None of that would even be relevant here. Secondly, why is MMWD proposing to add the fee as a charge on annual property tax bills rather than as a line item fee on our bi-monthly water bills, as is the case for the current service charge and watershed management fee? Is the real reason so that the charge will be buried on the property tax bill and thus not be a constant irritant to customers? It's recognized that in a service area the size of MMWD's, it's virtually impossible for customers to successfully protest a Prop 218 increase. However, you should note it would still be possible for customers to pursue an initiative afterwards to roll back the fee. MMWD needs to go back to the drawing board and start from scratch, taking the necessary time to come up with a new proposal in conjunction with a broad base of its ratepayers. And it's also far beyond time to ensure that all board meetings are streamed online and on TV via the Community Media Center, so that those unable to attend in person can witness the comments of board members and of the public on rates and other issues. Thank you.
And does the rate proposal track CPI?
The increases to the capital maintenance fee are directly linked to a construction index, and it's capped at 4%. So were the construction index to be 1% next year, assuming this went through under that scenario, the increase in the CMF would be 1%. If the index went up 6%, it would be capped at 4%. So that is capped. The 4% a year is intended to keep track with increasing costs and inflation. It is at 4%. The part of the challenge we're faced with is a distinction of the Bay Area inflation and nationally, but more so, many of our costs go up faster than inflation. So for example, power is a significant element of our cost structure, and our costs to PG&E have just gone up dramatically. And you know, I think it's fair to expect that in the future, not dissimilar with chemical costs and other costs. So our costs historically, and similar agencies nationally are finding the same thing, are go up at a higher rate than inflation. Mariette?
Hi, my name is Mariette Shin, and I'm an employee of the Water District. I am here to represent my colleagues and my coworkers. I am an information systems analyst, GIS specialist who's worked at the Water District for 18 years. I have a master's degree from UC Berkeley, so in terms of qualifications, I wanted to just speak to the fact that my colleagues are hardworking, skilled professionals who are very responsive, very responsible, and their people's comments regarding salaries and pensions really don't seem to do a lot of justice to the fact that our salaries are average. About 11 years ago, the board agreed to allow us to raise our salaries to average for our universe of comparable agencies in the Bay Area, and not a penny above that. So that was what we considered fair, and it's not that our salaries are excessive. You'll see that they're fairly equivalent to other salaries for the professional positions that we represent. So I wanted to basically speak to the fact that we are 24/7 operation. We have long-term employees who provide a lot of history, knowledge, and contribute a great deal to the Water District. And I just wanted to be here to represent that side of the story, since it often gets forgotten. Employees are probably the district's most important assets and often overlooked in these discussions about pensions and salaries. So, thank you.
Thanks for showing up.
Thank you. I want to underscore something Mariette said. I think that's exactly right, that our employees really are, maybe right up there with the watershed, our most important asset. So thank you for coming today. Thank you.
I might also comment on something that you said, and that is that if you look at water agencies statewide, if you are not paying an average salary, then your agency becomes a training ground for new graduates, new employees who, as soon as they acquire their certificates, as soon as they acquire the knowledge in their job, they move. And so lowering our rates, lowering our salaries would turn us into a training ground where you're always having basically turnover and also less skilled and less knowledgeable folks working on your water system.
Yes,
it's happened.
That has happened here. And I just wanted to let you know that we have about 78-79% of our employees working outside of our service area because they can't afford living outside of our service area, which is definitely not the same as some other water utilities. It's probably a much higher percentage because they can't afford the cost of living to live here.
Thanks again.
So I'll be brief. I know it's been a long evening, but I want to thank you for your time. I'm Alan Broden. I'm the field representative for SCIU Local 10-1. And I do want to say that I've been a rep for about a year and a half, and I've gotten a chance to really look at how complicated it is just to turn on the tap. The level of work, I got to go to some of the treatment facilities, all the different specialties that all of our staff have. Unfortunately, we all know horror stories of like Flint, Michigan and other places where safe drinking water isn't accessible, and that is a huge negative impact on people's property values, where they cannot sell homes. So places in Texas where people can't sell their homes because they don't have clean drinking water. And so also we had to recognize that this is a commodity that over 1 billion people do not have access to every day. So we have to make sure that not only do we protect the services that we provide, which I believe it's roughly a penny for every gallon of water, but we also have to face the challenges that are before us, particularly with climate change. And you don't do that by attacking your staff. You don't do that by cutting services and then turn around and then complain that the district is not providing those services, when at the same time we can't do that because the resources are not available to do it. So I just want to thank you for your time. We look forward to continuing to work with the Water District and our community allies to find creative ways and to make sure that all services are protected. We also have had less staff doing more work, and that has impacts on people's personal lives, their family lives, their willingness to want to stay here. And to speak to recruitment and retention, Mendocino County thought it was great to cut and go after people's wages, and they ended up spending $3 million in 1 year to recruit people. So we want to make sure that we don't go after our most precious resources, but we come together to figure out solutions that work for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Amy Willard from the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers. I would like to reinforce a point that was made by one of my colleagues earlier who spoke, that we have really prided ourselves, and increasingly so, on working together with various districts and agencies on cooperative solutions. And we've had a good feedback for that. We had an excellent initial meeting with the district, with Ben and Charlie, and I think there was a real spirit there of working towards some kinds of compromises. And I hope that we're headed in that direction, but I despair a bit. I want to emphasize the community really does understand the need for money for infrastructure and for watershed maintenance. Maybe somebody might quibble about the priorities or how much has to be spent in 1 year or the other year, but I think that there's an understanding out there that the money needs to be spent. But there are a lot of questions about this particular approach. I think you hear over and over again, it's disproportionately falling on the homeowners. And I don't think people believe that there's a justification for that it somehow adds to their property value. It's very heavy on the heavy burden on the 1 inch and the 1.5 inch people. This is exacerbated to some extent by the fact that there won't be bills sent to renters. And I think that that's a model increasingly that's happening throughout the county, is that everything kind of goes on the homeowner. And I'm not sure that is necessarily a progressive thought. It's very light on what ends up with the commercial people, the office buildings, the malls, etc. And the common person on the street, if you walked up to them and asked what would be fair, they would say, tie it to use. Meanwhile, we have this exemption for the private fire lines, and a sense that we're hearing back from the community about concerns from the schools and the cities about the fee being put on the tax bill, which crowds them out of their ability to potentially access for their taxing capability. And that's a problem for San Anselmo, and it's a problem for the Tamalpais Union High School District. And I think that Richard Harris made very articulately the point that it's not financially prudent or fair to skew so far to pay-go and to not use bonds to some greater extent. And I think finally, among the issues that the issues that the community has with this particular approach is that there's no reason this couldn't go on the water bill. None. And it could be tied to water use. So we and other ratepayers have asked many questions to illuminate facts around the proposal. And the goal is not to torpedo it. The goal is to understand whether the plan is fair and it's well designed or not, and to contribute some good ideas. So for example, we've asked questions, these are just a few of them. How many 1-inch meters are there, or 1.5-inch meters, that don't use much water? How much extra does it cost to bill via the tax and having the county bill for you when your own billing system is already in place and you can do that for free? What kinds of customers benefit from waiving the fire flow fee? We think it's malls and office buildings and such, and we'd like to have that quantified. And why does the MMWD estimate of what the schools will receive in the way of an invoice differ from the numbers that 2 of the school districts have done twice internally, and they're radically different? So we ask these questions, and in the past, when we ask such questions, it's been fabulous. We get a quick reply, there's a back and forth with some dialogue, we get to the bottom of it, and generally we're satisfied with what we hear. This time around, every question goes to the legal department, where it's treated as PRA. We get weeks of delay, and then maybe we end up with an answer that didn't really resolve the question because we're not in a real-time dialogue. We're dealing with document searches. But nonetheless, and I really am getting to the bottom line here, Paul Primo came up with a really good idea. And it solves everybody's problem. It allows you to get the capital that you need to know will be there year by year. And it is equitable and proportional as required by Prop 218. And it satisfies most of the community concerns. Once you mail this notice, you can't have a different metric than the meter. It's a poor problem. And I think that as part and parcel of that, it's also not really clear whether once you mail this, you can get away from the tax bill approach to it. So I'm really encouraged that you're listening and that you may tinker at the margin, but at the end of the day, you're pushing forward towards an artificial deadline that has no real world urgency to try to get this done for the July 1 tax bill. And you have a fundamentally flawed plan that is formulated around the wrong metric. And the only solution to this is to have time out and do it again and do it right and involve the community in developing the plan. And I think that you'll get support for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Priscilla Bull from Kentfield, and first, Roger Roberts was unable to be here tonight, but he had a comment that he wanted to present, so I have it here. But and this is a surprise for me that I totally agree with the cost people about the presentation. Ben's presentation was fabulous. Why wasn't it in the packet? I assume there was a time crunch and couldn't get it there. But so many questions were, I think, answered there, but we didn't have time to look at it, talk about it, call up with questions. This is, I hope that this won't happen again, because I'm used to getting things in the packet. And your very first slide had to do with my favorite topic, which is the watershed, and you had all kinds of extra money in there promised that I had no idea where it was coming from, how it was going to work. One of my questions was, when you are putting money from the capital maintenance fee into watershed, does that just fire and fuel? That's the way I'm reading this notice, that the capital maintenance fee funds fire reduction efforts on the watershed and nothing else. And I'm concerned about the rangers. I'm concerned about biodiversity enhancement. I'm concerned about trail maintenance, which has just been neglected for years. I'm concerned about erosion on the trails. I mean, it goes on and on. So we don't have a chance to ask that question.
Well, can I just ask you to pause, and this won't take away from your time, because a number of people have raised this, so can we just answer this question? Because people, I think partly what was happening here, Priscilla, is that we had some slides about the watershed before in some of the other presentations, and these questions, people were confused, and so I believe the staff tried to come back to be more clear, but I think tonight was more clear, but that may be why you didn't get a chance to see it beforehand, but I think there's still, I think we should just be able to answer this question. So can we just pause and give Priscilla more time to talk? And just answer these questions.
Well, wait a minute, that's just,
okay.
Okay, I mean, I understand.
However you want to do it, I just thought we'd try to actually answer your questions. Unless you don't want us to.
I wasn't gonna take the time, because
I think we need to
I'm
take the
sympathetic
time.
with your having to get it out in the mail, but I'm also frustrated that this is a cap. And frankly, unlike some people in the audience, I think you need more money. And especially for the watershed, and I was interested in so many people talking about rangers tonight very eloquently. And that was something that we brought up 2 or 3 years ago when I was on that committee that Jack kindly put me on for the One TAM group. And that was one thing with the group was unanimous and sent a letter 2 or 3 years ago. We want more rangers. We never heard that there was a discussion about it or anybody got back to us about whether that was a terrible idea. But anyway, that's been out there for a long time. But I will proceed to read Roger's comments, and they may not even be relevant based on the presentation, I don't know. But he unfortunately could not be here. He says, the draft Prop 218 notice still does not level or come clean with the public on the true dimensions of the district's necessary capital investment and replacement needs going forward. I believe that this is a serious mistake and that MMWD is missing an opportunity to communicate clearly and unambiguously why this proposed CMP is only a down payment on the total capital investment replacement needs of the district, and in the process begin to mobilize and develop public support for a true and effective capital investment plan to replace its aging infrastructure. Separately, but at the same time, the district would be well served also to let the public know that upon the completion of its ongoing and detailed asset management analysis, it will plan to bring forward on a date certain its actual and necessary capital replacement schedule for further public review, discussion, and action.
Okay.
And
Very much.
he has a better voice than I.
I really would like to get back to these specific questions because they've come up at least half a dozen times tonight, and I'm confident that there's staff in the room that have answers. So if we could just please do that.
I can start and look for support as needed. The CMF is dedicating $1 million a year that would go up at the index rate for the watershed, additional money for the watershed.
I think Priscilla's asking what that means.
The bulk,
Is that this thing?
the bulk of that money, the bulk of the green is targeted for implementation of the BIFA and related activities, specifically fuel reduction is the bulk of that investment. In addition, as you saw tonight, in the 2-year time frame, the total expenditures budgeted in revenues with the watershed are going up 1.6 million above that $1 million increase that's coming from the CMF, and that is intended to address a range of watershed activities, including things like you mentioned, trail enhancement, weed abatement, and the like. It may make sense. We did have the opportunity to sit down with MCL and similar folks a few weeks ago to reconvene that group and really break down in detail the budget so you can see it and appreciate what's planned going forward.
I believe Armando asked for that last time.
Can that be
put it in categories? Yeah.
Can that be provided to the public? those categories? Because I mean, I didn't see those outlined tonight.
Yes.
Thank you.
And abbreviation BIFIP is Biodiversity Fire Fuel Integrated Plan. So that's going to be actually on our agenda on Thursday afternoon. So that should also be a pretty intense and interesting meeting. Ann Thomas.
Hi, I'm Ann Thomas, speaking for myself. I'm a Corte Madera resident, and Priscilla kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but I did want to make sure that I go on the record as saying that you really should have asked for 5 or 6%, and this 4% is just hogwash. I mean, you know it's not enough. I did want to note, though, that I really do like the PAYGO system. And I can assure the representatives from COST that in 20 years from now, there will be plenty of other things that people are going to have to pay for. So they are not being left off the hook at all. And I actually like the idea of this going on the property tax bill, which I know a lot of people don't, but it may be naive, but I kind of think that people who rent are probably lower income than people who on the whole are property owners, and that is that what you call sort of an economic justice kind of thing there? You know, to let people who own houses pay more. And my main concern was that after years of off and on rate stability, with an undue focus, I think, of trying to stay in that rate mid-range of Bay Area water supply agencies, that the 4% you proposed now is really insufficient. And as Priscilla said, it misleads the public about the scope of the capital needs, and in particular, the extent to which the watershed has been allowed to decline. A Finance Committee report in December indicated that there were something like $182 million in unfunded capital projects. And I know you're not going to run out and do these all at once, but seriously, there is with a century-old business that you're running, there's just a lot of things that are going to have to be replaced. And of course, we think that there needs to be more money for the watershed, because with climate change, rising fire risk, increased recreational usage, and all of the impacts, it has been neglected for a long time, and you really need to do more for it. So thank you very much, and I hope you will really beef up what you are doing for the district and become better parents. Thank you.
Larry Minnick, because Ann is a hard act to follow. I'm going to try and go in a little bit different direction because it's really late. And there's two subtexts here, I think. And one is keeping homeownership affordable in Marin. I think we're hearing a lot of that. And I think the other thing we're hearing is a sense of there's a lack of fairness, and people are feeling victimized, that you're hitting them with a tax. But what's missing here is, what's the benefit? What are we getting for this? And it's just like fixing up your car or fixing up your home. And I brought this subject up, and what people have to understand is what's coming around the corner that no one's looking at, and that's home insurance. That's fire insurance. So what I've done here, I'm doing this more because I sent you, the board, this information. I'm doing this more for the benefit of the remaining public here. I'm just going to read 4 headlines. And these were all within the last 4 months, okay, 5 months. Los Angeles Times: as California fire disasters worsen, insurers are pulling out and stranding homeowners. All right, next one. New York Times: how wildfires are making some California homes uninsurable. Next one. This is Scientific American: insurers see smoldering risk after California's worst wildfire. And then the North Bay Business Journal: as wildfires drive California insurance premiums up, will homeowners be able to keep up? Well, I happened to have coffee with someone yesterday, and he has a house in in Squaw Valley. And there was a fire a few years ago to the south, 30 miles, he said. He's not even in an area that's threatened. He's lived there for decades. He's had farmer's insurance for 30 years. They just cancel it. So what this is doing What this investment is doing is helping to protect us to stay in our homes. Two ways: one, safety, and two, $200 or whatever the fee is, $160 a year, compared to thousands of dollars that you might see your insurance go up, is a big difference. And what I've asked staff to do is to bring in some insurance experts so that they can talk to us and we can find out what we can do to keep home ownership stable. Because the biggest expense is going to become home insurance. That's what's around the corner. So this little fee that we're talking about, this $13 or $14, people translate into 23% or this. No, it's 2 beers. It's 2 people going to In-N-Out Burger a month. I mean, that's what we're really talking. We're not talking about much. And with Ann, you know, we're not even close to what we need to spend. For example, and you can correct me here, this plan will replace 5.1 miles per year, or 51 miles over the next 10 years, as I read it. Previously, we were doing, I think, this past year about 12 miles. Well, we have 300 miles now of aged pipe out of our 900 plus miles, okay? So at the end of 10 years, we're not gonna have 250 more. We're gonna have 300 or more, because more of it's gonna get old. And it's gonna be the same with the tanks and the pumps. So we're really underfunding this thing considerably. And even if we funded to what staff had recommended, we'd only have 149 miles of that 300 miles replaced, which means at 10 years, we're not gonna have 150, we're gonna have more. And I think staff is pulling that together so we know what we're looking at in the future. So people are complaining about this fee, but the problem is that the 218 notice is not explaining this to the ratepayer, that this, as Roger said, that this is a down payment, that we have so much more expense coming due. And if we put it off, one of the studies, and I brought this up before, I'm going to bring it up again, is if we hold off for another 10 years, it's going to be 3.5 times as expensive in those dollars as it is today. So these are all things for consideration, and really the more we spend now, the better off we're going to be. And one thing I'm going to try and do here is, you know, this school strike for climate on Friday, I'm going to try and approach the schools, because what people are saying in this room is, I want those kids to pay for this stuff. I want the next generations to pay for this. And what this generation is not getting is, we didn't pay for this. People in the 20s, 30s, 40s, they are the ones that built this. People in the 50s, 60s, and maybe a little bit in the 70s, they paid for that infrastructure. We got a free ride. We've been subsidized here for years. We've been getting water well below cost. And now everyone's shocked. And it's the same people who, as I said at the beginning of this meeting, who had screamed and cried about this, and 4% no, and 7% no at the rate hearings, are the same people that are saying you didn't do enough. Why didn't you raise rates? That was, I mean, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. Thank you.
I just have one thing to follow up on insurance. I called my insurer and was informed they give a 7 to 9% discount for having sprinklers. So I'm in the class 1 inch that will pay more for that, because it got upgraded for that service. But I'm saving about $180 a year in homeowners insurance. So, you know, there's a bigger picture. That folks have to kind of keep in mind. And the whole availability of insurance is a big issue. Big issue. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Thanks, Larry.
I'm Barbara Salzman, and first of all, I thought what you were going to answer was why the presentation wasn't sent out to everybody, and I wanted the answer to that, why it wasn't sent out in advance, and I was hoping you would answer that, because I have the same concern. Was that what you were asking for?
Can we answer that?
We are, well, this specific one, I think it was a fair characterization by someone that it was a work in progress, that's just an excuse and not a reason, and I understand that. And we are talking about, over time, improving our practice in ensuring the public has the benefit of as much information as we can provide. And we are hearing it, and we're taking it seriously, and we're going to be moving in the right direction.
Good, glad to hear that.
Can I just add one thing to that? Isn't the significant fact here is that we're beginning the process here. So there will be plenty of time for that information to get out and be discussed by people over the next couple of months.
Well, it would have been helpful to have it tonight so we could respond to it.
I would agree, me too, but it's not the end of the line. It will be, assuming we approve the 218 notice.
Well, okay, well, you know, I wasn't gonna, I'm the only one that's will speak to this, I guess, but, you know, I have a problem with the 218 system. I had a problem with it when the school district used it, and because I was away, I'm used to going to the polls. I never miss an election, and lo and behold, I missed the election because I was away and was not watching my mail and didn't understand this process. So I think it's really kind of questionable. I know it's legal and you can do it, and probably a lot of people will fall through the cracks, and it's probably better to your benefit.
We don't have a choice.
You don't have a choice.
We don't have a choice.
You
We're
couldn't do it.
required to do the 218.
It's what it is.
Well, it's really
dictated by
I
the
think
state.
it's unfair. But anyway, I'm glad that you're doing
Sorry.
a lot of public. Anyway, no, I didn't realize you had to do it. I think it's
Dictated by the state constitution.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess you can't fight the Constitution.
Well, you could.
Good try, actually. But anyway, I wanted to join the others in supporting actually needing more money, because it's not clear to me that the watershed is going to be protected the way and enhanced the way it should be. And I think that's something that we need more information on, and in whatever way you can provide it in advance. Because we all know, especially if you're going to continue to not use herbicides, that the proliferation of the invasive species that are so flammable and so problematic in terms of fire, we need to do a better job on that. And so water's cheap, you know, but you gotta have good staff. You have to have support infrastructure, and that's expensive. So we all need to pay for it. I must say there were, I thought, some convincing arguments in terms of people paying that use it. So I'm not an expert in how you should ask for it, but I think there were some good points made on that side. Anyway, I think you should ask for more. Thanks, Barbara.
Okay, anybody else? Come on forward, John.
I'm sorry there, you were absolutely right. It was on the agenda. If I do my homework, I'll do my homework better next time. Well, I've heard a lot of interesting things that have piqued my interest. The water size fees apparently are recommended by an organization that provides information to water districts. And I'll follow up with your new director there, on your official manager, on getting that that organization's recommendation, see what it's based on and whatever. Because it's recommended doesn't make it right. And I work for the federal government, and I've seen all kinds of recommendations by very knowledgeable people that turned out to be pure bullshit. And so I think even though it's a recommendation by an organization, you really ought to take a hard look at that. Several people have commented on the size of water metering have nothing to do with their consumption. And I think the term that was used is a reasonable accommodation for some future need. I'm sorry, I don't buy that. I think it's within your discretion to deviate from that. And in my case, like one of the other gentlemen, I need a 3/4 inch water meter in order to get adequate flow to my property and for fire protection. Secondly, I just hope that if nothing else, you might consider a senior exemption or reduction in some of these fees.
I, like several of the other people that appeared before you tonight, I'm on a limited income. When I retired, my income dropped to a third of what it had previously been. And there are a lot of people in Marin, that not the new people that are coming in with the money. There are a lot of old timers in Marin. I've lived here for over 45 years that don't have a lot of money and are faced with the fees to keep their house, for example, earthquake proofing and things of this sort. Secondly, lastly, let me say this. I think this is the most important thing. I hope none of the employees that are hearing this think that I have anything but praise for the work that they do. I've had several contacts with Water District employees. They've all been great, timely, and very professional. So you're to be commended for that. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just say before you sit down, I really want to thank you especially for your comments about the employees. We have a lot of people come who smack them around unfairly and in a way that is extremely uninformed. So I very much appreciate and value your making that point. Thank you.
Thank you. You really do have some great employees.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
I have a question about something that was just stated by the board. May I ask it?
Go ahead.
Thank you. My question is regarding the 218 process. As I understand it, but I'm not an expert on 218 and I'm not an attorney, but I thought that the 218 process that you're doing is basically an exemption from Prop 218 that that sets certain criteria about how you have to proceed in order to not have a popular vote for something that you want to do. So I guess the question is that the case? And I'm not trying to suggest that you have to have a popular vote. I'm just trying to clarify as to whether that would in fact be an option for you if you wanted to. I don't expect that you want to, but I'm just trying to clarify whether that's an option.
I'm going to throw that to you, Mary.
The fees that we're discussing here tonight are property-related fees, and under 218, whenever a water agency, for example, provides a service where a property benefits, it's a property-related fee. Under
Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're not talking about the CMF, you're talking about the whole package.
I'm talking about the CMF, I'm talking about the 4% across the board on the variable rates, the tiered rates.
Thanks.
And it's governed by Article 13D6 of the California Constitution.
And it's also a result of Prop 13. Right. That's where 218 was born.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is 218.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to close the public hearing now and bring it back to the board for discussion, deliberations. So that's where we are. So where to begin?
We've obviously heard a lot of good points here, a lot of good suggestions, some of which at least I never considered before. But I anticipate that I will be thinking about them and that I will be considering them, and I appreciate the process gives me the next 2 months to consider all of these. So I'm anxious to get the process started so we can put some meat on the skeleton here.
Anybody else?
Well, I want to say that since I've been on the board, one of the things that I've seen, because I heard a lot of individuals comment about their situations, and what I have consistently seen with this district is those individuals working with our leadership and our staff can usually figure out a way to move forward effectively, because for us to come up with a policy in just a few meetings that actually affects everybody perfectly, equitably, it's pretty tough to do. And so for those of you who have individual specific issues, I really encourage you to actually call our general manager and see who can. No, that's, I mean, I'm serious. and see if the staff can address the things that have come up with your situation. That's my experience. I mean, we have, I can give a bunch of examples, including folks who had an unidentified leak that had them with an extraordinary water bill. That's not a situation where the water district, that they didn't know about, a leak that they didn't know. That's not a situation where the district goes in and says, well, you're gonna have to pay the.
But you're the people setting the policy.
Understood, but the staff or I should say the management team here can still work with individuals and then come to the board and say, hey, look, we've got an idea of how to deal with this problem that seems to fall out of the mainstream. So, but I also feel like that what we have to do is we have to move forward with. I would like to move forward with this 218 and get the public discussion going and see how we craft this in time to keep the district functioning well.
So not to repeat, to avoid repeating what my colleagues have said, I just want to particularly thank the staff that have shown up to provide their perspective. That's something we don't hear all the time, and I want to thank everybody who spoke out in behalf of the watershed. It is our largest, most critical asset, and there aren't enough people to speak for it. So I just want to particularly thank folks who came here to speak about that, as well as everybody else who shared their views. I found it a very constructive conversation.
So I would just like to say, this is a process, a dynamic process that's going to be continuing for the next 2 months. And staff has given us some degree of latitude in how we implement within the parameters of the notice. So the notice is not the final statement of what the board's policy will be or how it'll be implemented. The other big point I want to make is we on the board and the public, we're all in this together. We all live here, we all pay water bills, we all have family here, we all live in the shadow of the mountain that we all revere. So I just want to give you assurance that we are operating in good faith to try to construct the most equitable rates for the public. We all recognize water's a human right. It's not a commodity, and that is what we need to deal with here. We have to balance the needs of the mountain, the environment, the public, and this institution, which was formed by the public and for the public, and that we all have reverence for, to make sure that it continues in the future to provide the level of service and the purity of the water that we are all privileged to share. So that's what we're trying to do here. So do we have a motion?
I interpreted
Yep.
Armando's
Well,
comment.
I'll move that the board authorizes staff to mail this 218 notice to the property owners in Marin.
I'll second.
Okay. Roll call.
Director Russell?
Aye.
Director Quintero?
Aye.
Director Kohler?
Aye.
Director Gibson?
Aye.
And President Bragman?
Aye. Last item.
I'm really ready.
Charlie. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is an item.
I appreciate what you have to say. Thank you very much. It was super helpful.
Okay, boss. This next item is requesting permission from the board
to recruit for our 17 summer seasonal positions through this next fiscal year. We will start before the end of this fiscal year recruiting for our summer interns. Typically these positions work for 6 months or fewer, and but they are replaced in some cases during the year. This is not something, this is something that has come before the board each year, and this does not add to the overall full-time employee number of 240.
Any questions?
This I gather is unrelated to our youth to work project that we have every year.
I think you're correct in that.
I think
yes.
last year we did we budgeted $40,000 or appropriated $40,000 for the youth.
Correct. Yeah, Youth to Work is funded through professional services contract.
Okay. And I know they're anxious to get going again. Is that underway or?
Yeah, we've reached out to them to renew for next fiscal year. Yeah.
Perfect. I'll move approval.
I'll second.
Yeah.
Roll call.
Director Russell?
Aye.
Director Quintero?
Aye.
Director Kohler?
Aye.
Director Gibson?
Aye.
President Bragman?
Aye. And that brings us to an end
Another delightful evening.
Okay.
of our meeting.
Thank
So
you.
I will adjourn us, and thank you all very much. All right.
Thank you to Ben and your team.
Take care.
I know, I can see that. I can see that.
Thank you.
There's a lot of abstract. It looked like an abstract quilt.
Did you hang that up?
Oh, yeah. I actually recognized your name when I heard it.
I want
Me too.
I agree.
I know, you decided that's right. Go more chicken. No.
Thank you.
But are you now your spouse? Yeah, he's 87 going on 88.
I know.
I'm 81 going on 82. Yeah, I mean, these guys are when you were born.
When, I mean,
April 9th.
my son's
So,
I have a section for
I can only see
It made me think I was.
Well, now
Oh my God, it's become very challenging.
Pointed out that I almost left my video system.
It's about iPhone?
Yeah.
iPhone with a tripod.
Yeah.
It works.
This is not very